If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be. Thomas Jefferson nailed it. But here's the deal. Mass, widespread ignorance about the Constitution is no accident. It's by design. Because an educated people are harder to dominate and control. They ask inconvenient questions. They know the difference between a servant and a master. And when government violates the rules given to it, an educated, free people, well, they slap it right back into place, and fast. So on this episode, 5 constitutional truths they almost never teach. Because if they did, we wouldn't be living under the largest government in history. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome, and thank you for joining me here on the path to liberty. My name is Michael Boldin with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, June 25th, 2025. And the first thing that the government-run schools, government-approved schools fail to teach, well, why we even have a written constitution. And for that, we go to St. George Tucker, who tells us that it was birthed in the American Revolution, where they toiled under arbitrary power for generations. This was the unwritten British Constitution that led to the Revolution and the Declaration of Independence. And Tucker put it like this: the American Revolution seems to have given birth to this new political phenomenon. In every state, a written constitution was framed and adopted by the people, both in their individual and sovereign capacity and character. And the founders widely understood that if government doesn't have clear written rules, well, government is just going to make it up as it goes. And that's how Edmund Randolph put it in his opinion against the constitutionality of Alexander Hamilton's First National Bank. Randolph put it like this: governments having no written constitution may perhaps claim a latitude of power not always easy to be determined. And the old revolutionaries, they learned this firsthand under the British. Without written limits on power, eventually there are no limits at all. And back to St. George Tucker. He said the advantages of a written constitution, considered as the original contract of society, must immediately strike every reflecting mind. Power, when undefined, soon becomes unlimited. Unlimited power. The largest government in history is a great example of that. Tucker also explained that through a written constitution, the framers made sure that everyone would understand who works for whom. He wrote, by this means, the just distinction between the sovereignty and the government was rendered familiar to every intelligent mind. The former was found to reside in the people and to be unalienable from them. The latter in their servants and agents. I mean, this should be really straightforward stuff. Under the constitutions in the United States, sovereignty or final authority is with the people of the several states, and government at every level is merely a servant and agent of those people of the several states. That is the pecking order. But next up, Tucker explains what I think is probably the most important part, the most important reason for a written constitution. It's not something that most people even think about. It's really just kind of an alarm. It's a warning sign. He said a written constitution has, moreover, the peculiar advantage of serving as a beacon to apprise the people when their rights and liberties are invaded or in danger. Think of it this way. You rent out a room in your house. Maybe you put it on short-term rentals or something. And if you want rules followed, you got to put those rules in writing, like things like no smoking, no parties after 10 o'clock, no pets, no parking, whatever the rules may be in your home. Because if you don't put it in writing, your tenant or resident or guest, well, they're going to make up the rules for themselves. They're going to decide for themselves what they consider acceptable. That's why it's so essential to have those rules written down, especially for government. And I think that's what brings us to our second lesson that they almost never teach in the government-run and government-approved so-called education system. When those rules are broken, we describe them with one single word: void. And that's how the entire founding generation understood things. Let's kick it off first with James Otis Jr. in his speech against the writs of assistance. This is really the kickoff of the American Revolution, February of 1761, where James Otis said, "An act against the Constitution is void." It's void the moment they try to pass it. And meanwhile, of course, this was under the unwritten British Constitution, so Otis and the revolutionaries, they had a much harder uphill battle to fight against a government who said, well, no, we determine whether or not our acts are void, but we'll get to that more in just a moment. Now, here's the real danger. Thomas Jefferson brought this same principle to the forefront decades later in 1791 in his opinion against the constitutionality of Alexander Hamilton's First National Bank. Once you let them get away with violating the rules once, you've really basically set the stage for them to violate it constantly, and eventually they'll have no rules at all. He said, to take a single step beyond the boundaries thus specially drawn around the powers of Congress is to take possession of a boundless field of power, no longer susceptible of any definition. Now, here's the thing about written rules and written constitutions. All history proves that people with power will ignore limits on their power whenever they can get away with it. And even if you find a unicorn who will follow all the rules given to him, who will not try to expand power, well, that person isn't going to hold power forever. Eventually, someone else will have that power, and we're going to end up with problems. And that's the third truth that they don't want you to know. As John Dickinson put it, even the best constitution suffers from this reality. A good constitution promotes, he wrote, but not always produces a good administration. And that's because, as James Madison reminded us, words on paper don't enforce themselves. They never did, and they never will. Now, he didn't put it in that exact terminology, but writing in Federalist Papers number 49, and think of the impact of this. This is the father of the Constitution, urging the people of New York to ratify the Constitution, and he's telling them, well, this Constitution isn't enough to keep government in check. This is how he put it. Mere declarations in the written Constitution are not sufficient to restrain the several departments within their legal limits. So, please ratify this. But this isn't going to get the job done. Well, what's the point of the Constitution? Well, we had covered that already. Now, in the previous Federalist Paper, number 48, Madison referred to constitutions as mere parchment barriers. And for you parents out there, think of it like this. You want your kid, let's say, to clean their room like every Saturday. So you tell them this, you put a note on their door that says, clean your room every Saturday. And then you just leave it to the note to enforce itself. Odds are, in most situations, that note isn't going to get the job done for very long, and eventually that room cleaning isn't going to happen. So documents, when you think about it, documents, they can't, they won't, they never did, they never will enforce themselves. But as Thomas Jefferson also explained, you sure can't trust government to limit its own power. And here he is in the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798. The government created by this compact was not made the exclusive or final judge of the extent of the powers delegated to itself, since that would have made its discretion, and not the Constitution, the measure of its powers. And James Wilson, who was one of the first associate justices on the Supreme Court, a leading advocate of the Constitution, he explained the real chain of command, the fourth truth that they almost never teach us. He said, as our constitutions are superior to our legislatures, so the people are superior to our constitutions. And John Jay, the first Chief Justice, he explained the bottom line. Again, government is merely an agent of the people. The Constitution, well, it's basically government's employee handbook. He said the Constitution only serves to point out that part of the people's business, which they think proper by it to refer to the management of the persons therein designated. Short version, the people are at the top of the food chain. In the Constitution for the United States, it's the people of the several states. Those people decided they wanted someone to handle certain business for them. And so they put down rules on paper, the Constitution for these United States, and then they basically hired some government people to carry out that business and nothing more. So the Constitution is a set of rules for those agents, those servants of the people and the states who they hired to conduct this particular business. Now, think of how stupid it would be to hire a babysitter for your kids and give that babysitter a bunch of rules, and then the babysitter breaks all the rules, and then you go to the babysitter and say, well, hey, I think you broke the rules, but it's really up to you to determine if you broke the rules that we've given to you. This would not work out very well. And when you use that same approach with government, it has really deadly consequences for a lot of people. And that's why John Dickinson, again, the penman of the American Revolution, the lead author of the Articles of Confederation, and then also author of so many essays in support of ratification of the Constitution, he explained that ultimately it's up to the people themselves to protect and defend their own Constitution, whether the government likes it or not. He said it is their duty to watch and their right to take care that the Constitution be preserved, or in the Roman phrase on perilous occasions, to provide that the Republic receive no damage. And that's our fifth and probably most important truth that they want you completely ignorant about. It's up to the people, again, to protect and defend their own Constitution and their own liberty, no matter what the government happens to say about it, because they're just merely servants and agents. It's not up to them to determine how we decide to protect and defend our own Constitution and our own liberty. Enforcement by the people themselves. That's our fifth and probably most important truth they want you completely ignorant about. Luther Martin, the fiery anti-federalist, he tied it all back to the Revolution. He said, by the principles of the American Revolution, arbitrary power may and ought to be resisted, even by arms if necessary. And at the height of the Revolution, December of 1774, a fiery, young Alexander Hamilton, I wish we still had this version of him years to follow, but we lost him. Well, he put it in terms at that point that any tyrant could understand. He said, all we aim at is to convince your high and mighty masters, the ministry, that we are not such asses as to let them ride us as they please. I love that one. He said, we are determined to show them that we know the value of freedom, nor shall their rapacity extort that inestimable jewel from us without a manly and virtuous struggle. And then Thomas Jefferson, he comes in for the knockout. He explained the difference between a free people and subjects. He said a free people claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as the gift of their chief magistrate. So here's our choice: a real land of the free, or a population on its knees continuing to beg for permission from the largest government in history. But because of the government-run and government-approved so-called education system, almost no one ever learns any of this stuff in school. And ever since the TAC was founded, literally 19 years ago tomorrow, June 26th, 2006 is the day that I registered the domain name 10thamendmentcenter.com. Well, this has been a big part of the reason why we work so hard every single day in and day out, month in and month out, and I can hardly believe it, 19 years, year in and year out, to reach and teach more and more people about these essential foundational principles, about essential history from the founders and the old revolutionaries, from the great thinkers they read and learned from. how to enforce the Constitution and liberty, whether the government likes it or not, and they certainly do not. Well, nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. So if you want to help us commemorate our 19 years and kick off the next 19 and more, if you got a couple of bucks of that dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Our membership program starts out at just $2 a month. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. Now, if you don't want to become a member, that's totally fine, but you still want to help us spread the word, you still want to help us out financially, you can make a one-time contribution, a one-time gift over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. I'm very grateful for all of the support you've already given us and for any consideration you can give to putting your financial faith behind the 10th Amendment Center today. Of course, there's a bunch of free and easy peasy things that you can do to help us spread the word, primarily by triggering the algorithm of the platforms you may watch or listen on. So hitting the like button, subscribing, getting notifications, reviews on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform, watch time percentage on video platforms like YouTube is really, really important for the algorithm. So if you got a 10-minute video and you watch it 10 minutes, it's 100%. But if you watch it 25 minutes, let me see, my government-run education, that's 250% that you push that through. So whatever you may do to be able to help us out, financial, otherwise, or a combination, I'm very grateful for that. I'm also very grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was interesting, maybe a little entertaining here and there. But more important than anything, I hope it made you think, and I hope you learned something. Again, I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. Thank you so much for watching the show, and I look forward to seeing you next time here on the Path to Liberty.